You don't want more.
Those who mismanage our affairs would silence our criticism by pretending they have facts not available to the rest of us. Our best weapon against them is not to marshal facts of which they are truly managers, but passion. Passion is our hope and strength. So says Chinua Achebe in his Anthills of the Savannah. A very good morning to all. On behalf of the Department of English, Ethiraj College for Women, I welcome you all to the fourth day of the 5-day national webinar series on post-colonial literatures, contexts, and concerns. I feel immensely proud to introduce the speaker for the day, Professor Kusha Tiwari, a multifaceted academic who has readily consented to address the gathering today on the topic post-colonialism and gender studies in India. Currently working as a professor in the Department of English in Shyamlal College, University of Delhi, she has published research papers in journals and books, including Taylor and Francis, Sage, IUP, The Book Review, and Pencraft International. She has also guest edited a special issue on realms of gender interactions, South Asian perspectives for South Asian Survey, Sage, and she's published books with Bloomsbury on Towards a Sustainable Future, Cross-Cultural Practices, Strategies, and Advancements, with Pencraft International on Critical Perspectives on Toni Morrison and Narrative of Liberation, reading Nadine Gordimer's post-apartheid fiction, and with Research India and Cambridge Scholars Publishing on Gender and Popular Culture, Identity Constructions and Representations. She's also been the organizing convener of a major international conference on Through a New Looking Glass, Challenges for Women in 21st Century, funded by ICSSR, and a national conference on gender and popular culture, representations and embodiment, organized by Women Development Cell, Shyamlal College, University of Delhi, and sponsored and funded by ICSSR, UGC, and Ministry of Women and Child Development. She's been invited to lecture in Southeastern Finland University of Applied Sciences, Finland, Turku University of Applied Sciences in Finland, and Utkal University in Odisha, India, and IP University, Delhi. She's presented papers in many international and national conferences in Delhi University, NEIPA, Jadavpur University, CWDS, and University of Lisbon, Portugal. She's been the visiting faculty at Southeastern Finland University of Applied Sciences and Turku University of Applied Sciences in Finland, and has given lectures at both the universities. She's also the co-investigator in a major international project funded by CIMO Finland on responsible business professionals for Finland and India trade. She's a project coordinator of Unnat Bharat Abhiyan from her college. Her specialization is in the fields of transgender studies, women's studies, and South African literature. We welcome you, ma'am, for this wonderful day. Over to you, ma'am. Professor Kusha Tiwari.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I would like to thank Ethiraj College for Women for inviting me here in this webinar series. And I also must congratulate all the organizers and specifically the convener of this webinar series, Ms. K. Yashoda, and the entire advisory committee and students who have worked hard to organize this series. As I was seeing that, this series has had some sessions already in the last 3 days, 4 days. and on very interesting topics, ranging from poetry to neo-colonialism, Tamil literature. And the topic that I would be speaking on, it's uh, not on literature per se, because I would be talking on post-colonialism and gender studies in India. Now, uh, you know, though, I'll just start with what I have to say from the very beginning. Um, you know, we all understand post-colonialism. We all know what post-colonialism is, and you have talked about it in the last 4 days also. And so I would not really go much in detail with post-colonialism, but I would talk about how post-colonial state in India has paved way for a very vibrant discourse of women's studies and gender studies that has been garnering a lot of attention for past few decades. Now, we all are familiar with the discourse of post-colonialism because it addresses the impacts of colonial politics, the issues of minorities, specifically to the hegemony of superpowers and the Western world, which has been promoting globalization. And it also, addresses issues of marginality of women, blacks, immigrants, diaspora, so on and so forth. So, studies in post colonialism are preoccupied with all minority cultures across the world. Be it feminist writings from the global south, or black literatures, or ethnic minorities, or formerly colonized national cultures, or Dalit writings in India, or the literature of diaspora from countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Australia, Canada, Caribbean, and other countries across continents. Now there have been numerous studies, uh, to understand the relationship between post-colonial and gender discourses in social and historical context, with the first wave, the second wave, third wave, and fourth wave, and post-feminist movements, and also, indigenous rights movements that have all influenced the intellectual developments of post-colonialism and gender theory. Now, political struggles by women in the global south have shown the coloniality of gender and the gendered order of colonial violence. So, post-colonial gender theories, they critique the operations of power that value, or that emphasize on a masculine Eurocentric knowledge and practices. This is all that one can talk in detail about these connections between post-colonial and gender discourses. But today, I won't be talking about post-colonial studies or discourses per se, but I would rather use post-colonialism as a state of temporal transition for India from colonial to post-colonial situation, in specific context of rise and development of women and gender studies in the country in post-independence time. Now, my talk would start. I'll just give you a brief how I'm going to structure this talk. My talk would start by talking about women and gender studies in India in post-independence time. Then I would focus on what is feminism in the Indian context, or how feminist movement has worked out in the Indian context, and would end with talking about the establishment of women and gender studies uh, research centers in the university system in India, and the kind of researches and studies they are producing that are impactful in bringing about real changes in the society. Now, with women studies and gender studies, we have to understand how women studies have drawn or has drawn its vigor from the women's movement, as well as other progressive social movements that addressed systemic uh, inequalities or inequities in society. As for gender studies, it embraces issues beyond women's immediate concerns, issues such as masculinity and alternate sexual identities, signaling a contemporary trend towards gender inclusivity. More importantly, the overlapping terms of gender and women are also imbued with complex questions of caste, class, religion, ethnicity, disability, sexuality in such a diverse country like India. And these crossings and overlappings have focused the academic attention towards the intersectionality of oppression, that how oppression is not a linear unidimensional phenomenon, rather it works at various levels. There are uh, lots of crossings and overlappings when we talk about oppression of women, specifically in a diverse country like India. So, gender issues in India have evolved, have evolved or have been shaped by the political, economics, and cultural politics, state policies, social discourses, and movements. Gender status, let's say in the context of South Asia as a whole, if we talk about not just India, so gender status is sustained through the existence of a gendered social order which propagated through customs and laws in some countries in the subcontinent. And these customs and these laws specifically, they are reinforced to control women through sanctions, violence, and suppression of human rights, etc. So this hierarchical oppression in gender dynamics is vastly, I mean, if we really think about it, it is far removed from the dualism of ancient Indian philosophy also, where male and female may be different but were not essentially in many ways not essentially superior or inferior to each other, but were harmonious. Or in early societies, in the sub while in early societies in the subcontinent, gender stratification existed, but men and women had collective contributions to work and rights, and had equal rights to resources. So as the states and class structures emerged, differences between subjectivities were constructed in socio-economic and theological and political discourses, propagating conservative views of female subjecthood. So these, cultural distortions have also, in a way, they've solidified due to centuries of invasions and the colonial past also, that has contributed to developing a parochial mindset. Now, the extant literature on gender in India centers on women's experiences during the historical phenomenon and events like nationalist movement, partition of Bengal and partition of India, electoral politics in the entire subcontinent region, in the formal and the informal economic sector, intersections between gender, caste, ethnicity, culture, and religion. Now, in India, if we specifically talk about India, in India, the anti-imperialist struggle saw women's active participation in resistance movements, and that active participation really brought women leaders to the forefront in early 20th century, and this has shaped a distinctive partnership between women's movement and its academic counterpart, women's studies, during the struggle for independence and after independence. Now, when we got that women leadership in the early 20th century, that leadership which was provided by many educated women during anti-colonial resistance, and it opened up avenues of public participation alongside an awareness of the deep-rooted patriarchal oppression that had kept middle-class women hostage to domestic constraints. So, hence, in the early phase, women's movement addressed gender-based oppression and marginalization through protest, starting primarily with matters that concerned educated upper and middle class urban women. They took up issues such as dowry, bride burning, female infanticide, child marriage, or widow remarriage. Now, over time, these concerns, have expanded to include the concerns of the poor, rural, and Dalit women, so as to be more inclusive. While in the later part of the 20th century and in the new millennium, mainstream women's studies women's studies discourse has been interrogated by marginalized groups, such as based on class, disability, sexuality, and movements, which are based on tribal land or forest rights. So some of these concerns have yet to be adequately addressed. So this is how gender studies have emerged and developed in India specifically. Now, if we talk about I'm sorry. Yes. So, if we talk about the development of feminism in India, now coming back to, talking further about, not coming back to, but talking further about women and gender studies in India, the rise of women and gender studies is associated with the first generation of English educated women, as I just told you. English educated women who struggled against child marriage, widow burning, and female infanticide, and efforts for education for women and voting rights. Now, this movement uh, majorly touched only women from upper caste and upper classes. This was basically, you can say, the first wave of feminism in India. Now, the second wave of feminism, which began in around mid 1970s, the educated middle class women who were actively involved in different social movements of students, youth, workers, peasants, tribal, Dalit, and civil liberties, they played a very central role. And they abhorred the paternalism of, benevolent males and upper class women's charitable and philanthropic social work, and declared themselves as fighters for women's rights. Now, from here on, the focus was uh, that is from around 1980s. The focus was more on women's agency, and women were not seen merely as passive and mute victims of injustice and exploitation, but they were seen as active agents, challenging discrimination and violence in all spheres of their lives. The third wave, if we talk about a third wave, it essentially covered perspectives from those marginalized or excluded from previous waves, those groups like Dalit women or tribal women, women of color, women from or differently abled women. And this third wave, not just in India, but one can say internationally also, maybe it acknowledges the benefits of second wave feminism, and it provides the worldview of young feminists from the global south. Now, the current stage of women's studies is at least partially informed by the third wave, and male female binaries are critiqued, since these are viewed as artificial constructs created to maintain the power of dominant groups. Contemporary gender studies encompasses, macro, micro, and meso realities in all spheres. Be it economy, be it polity, or policy making, or local, national, regional, or global governance. So all these issues are, or they are taken up. Issues in all these areas are taken up. And there is a Dalit women's movement, that has questioned the privileging of upper caste women's priorities, and how scant attention has been paid to Dalit women's historiography in women's studies discourse in India. Issues of sexuality and transgenders, and an interrogation of the normative have impelled a different interface with the women's movement. Now, like for example, recent scholarship like Sharmila Regge, they have influenced intensive discussions on how Dalit women talk differently. Another example I would like to take is that of disability studies. There are scholars like Shubhangi Vaidya or Anita Ghai. They have increasingly drawn attention to the particular concerns of disabled women, and the need to interrogate normative notions of what is ableism, or of the beauty and the body within a highly heteronormative culture, normalizes or abnormalizes body in different contexts, okay, or in different human contexts. So feminists working in the area of disability, they continue to confront and they have talked about it, and they continue to confront institutionalized tokenism within mainstream feminist discourse. So women and gender studies scholars have responded in a variety of ways to internal critiques also, as is evident from very extensive studies like disability studies readers that have been brought out by Leonard J. Davis and Sharon L. Snyder. So scholarship on the dialectics between women, class, and labor, in a very rapidly industrializing capitalist society has allowed us to see how all these are very deeply enmeshed or are very deeply connected. At the same time, another example would be, how gender studies or women's studies have of late become inclusive. They've become very inclusive disciplines. So we have masculinity studies also that continue to operate alongside women and gender studies, and the role of men in feminism. It has invited both enthusiasm, and also there is a lot of guarded approach and speculation around it. But one thing is very clear: with the rise of gender studies, we see a strategic interrogation of the normative. What is normative? And how, the interrogation of the normative has as much to offer to transgender rights as it does to transgender rights activists, or as it does to straight men or Dalit women or disabled women, or women who are invested in questioning women's stereotypical socially approved identities. So that is what it has opened a lot of avenues for academic discourse, as well as activist discourse around what is normative and what is non-normative. Now, this was just a brief about how women's movement in India was, influenced, or it was influenced by the struggle for independence, and how gender studies have progressed from there on. Gender as well as women's studies have progressed from there on. Now, I would shed a bit of light on women and gender studies centers, or the discourse in the academia, specifically in India. Now, as I said, that there are intersectionalities of oppression, and there are crossings and intertwinings, and these crossings, intertwinings, and specifically intersectionalities, when we talk about women and that 1974 in Extant Women's University Mumbai. There onwards, systematic to need for centers to pursue research on women's issues. And all the framework plans were after that have supported establishment, the mainstreaming of women and the centers of the country. So currently, you would see that there are around 139 centers which are managed by UGC, and some are supported by ICSSR. And we have the center which is supported by ICSSR. These centers have survived, have despite profit of institutionalized support, inadequate funding, sources for quality research and academic work. So these centers have been doing some wonderful work around the country. So that compose women's it emerged, academic emerged alongside women's movement. And the early feminists, participated both, realized struggles, or like struggles, the life of women as well as contributing the academic discourse. It's true, however, that the academic field of women's studies, gender studies, still remain across institutional spaces like classrooms or libraries or conferences, or rather than the streets that are witnessed marginalized women's and men's daily struggles. Women's studies have occasionally, also come under fire for having lost its crucial intimate contact with the urgent freedom and grassroots work. However, it's important to recognize the need for nuanced changes or all language which and moreover, the academic, accused of women and other groups in favor of intellectualized discourses on bodies, sexualities, and sexual identities. These concerns, there's also debate. These are concerns, which are often read as concerns of privileged. These debates are also going on. So, despite such hurdles, women and gender studies have grown in the country to the extent that there have been remarkable outputs of socially full and economically relevant researches and studies have been conducted in collaboration with international agencies such as UNESCO or UN Women or Global Fund for Women and many more such international agencies. These they have specifically worked on issues that concern, as I said, the of women, like maternity care provisions, healthcare provisions for women, early and child marriage, lack of education, or lack of women's particular economic sphere. There have been studies highlighting the underrepresentation of women in politics, judiciary, bureaucracy, and to address these issues, some issues like underrepresentation of men in politics. To address such issues, India posed which participation. There's another angle. Major obstacles to women's participation in the public domain are and that of society is based on patriarchal initiatives, where women are socialized under authorities. Another obstacle which is being highlighted, which has been highlighted through some such studies, is the acutely competitive nature of politics, where when it becomes profitable, when something becomes a source of income and power, it is that is obviously controlled by men. So, well, definitely in society, with women in political power at the local level, with increasing grassroots actions towards women empowerment. Now, if I have to talk specifically about the research that has been conducted in women's study centers, then I would just name few areas that, and when I talk about these few areas, uh, in a way, is a way to highlight how there is a lot of multidisciplinary research that is being conducted in these centers, definitely becomes, which definitely becomes a connecting link between the academia and the public space, the issues and the problems that women face in the public place or in real life, and the academic concerns. So these are connected through the researches and the studies that women studies conduct. Now, feminists, just a few issues, a few studies I want to highlight. Feminists' theorizations and demands, offer a deep critique of gender and other related equities prevalent in Indian society. And these demands, they challenge, or these theorizations, they challenge established ways of constructing and understanding gender roles and identities by laying bare the patriarchal and hegemonic structures within which they are embedded. So, patriarchal beliefs and social customs, they create numerous disadvantages for women and for gender diverse people in the sphere of education, employment, politics, family, reproductive health, etc. And these are certain areas in which wonderful studies have been conducted in recent decades. And these studies have not just been limited to to conferences and conference proceedings or project reports. These studies have actually helped in create awareness in the government bodies, national bodies, and international bodies towards doing something, some meaningful work to resolve those issues related to education, employment, family, and reproductive health. For example, women and gender studies have shown, or they show, how female gender is systematically deprived of educational opportunities across the subcontinent, not just India, but there is data from other countries also in South Asia, where social customs prioritize the male child receiving education over the girl child. And there is a research which has been conducted in 2009, which shows how there are 15.8 million out of school primary school age children in South Asia, out of which it is 70% are girls. That is 11.5 million are girls out of that 15.8 million out of school primary school age children. And leading economists, they believe that women's education is the best return investment in developing nations, and it is the most effective way to achieve women's well-being, slow down population growth, create healthier and better educated families, and that lead to faster growth of per capita income. And another study which has been conducted by UNFPA, it's and in collaboration with local women study centers, that there are a huge regional caste, class, and income disparities, again, not just in India but in South Asia and even in Southeast Asia. And that accounts for 88% of maternal mortality and 83% of newborn mortality in the whole of Asia, in fact. So denial of education and access, and denial to access to healthcare resources, including or combined with lack of decision making power, these are responsible for unmet needs of women, for essential unmet needs of for women, for essential sexual and reproductive health services. And we also see that in again, the entire subcontinent, we see world's highest percentage of child marriages, unwanted pregnancies or risky abortions, maternal mortality, sexual abuse and violence. these are the studies that have been conducted in the new millennium, in the 21st century. So, women and gender studies discourse in the country has drawn attention to the consistently present real life gender oppression across classes, caste, and religions. Women and gender studies discourse, it has exposed the unjust nature of patriarchy. It insists on democratic and socially equitable ways of policy making. They also focus on economic empowerment of women, because economic empowerment paves the way to build pathways to power and freedom for women, as they challenge the resilient character of gendered norms governing global value chains, or corporate professional setups, or farming activities, or domestic labor markets. And women in India are acquiring and exercising power with control over domestic financial resources as well as labor market contributions. Women in both rural and urban sectors are engaged as a workforce in the local and global market, and continue to invest disproportionately in the unpaid child care and elder care work. That's also a major issues, which was highlighted only through the studies that were conducted in these the studies that come under women's and gender studies in present times. So these unpaid works, they limit their prospects in paid career choices. And women in the country are also, they also substantially contribute to the informal economy as domestic workers, street vendors, subsistence farmers, seasonal farm and labor, etc. uh, for example, again, another study that was conducted, it states that, and it was conducted just recently in 2015-16, which is that 95% of women, again covering the entire region, 95% of the women are in informal employment out of the total employed ones. And the informal employment arrangements, they leave women without any safeguards of social security and make them vulnerable to various forms of exploitations, as they mostly work without written contracts. So these uneven employment structures of informal economy have long-term impacts, as more and more women remain without any social protection and pension in the old age, creating further vicious networks of poverty. Now, India, in post-independent period, has introduced several social protection policies, programs, and constitutional amendments to curb social vulnerability, economic dependence of women, like the Hindu Succession Act in 2005, and promote equal opportunities. Uh, and India, as well as a lot of countries in South Asia or in Southeast Asia, they have been signatories to global humanitarian initiatives such as SDGs or MDGs or CEDAW, and the fourth conference for women held in 1995 for gender equality and empowerment. But despite the current social protection intervention, there are challenges uh, that have not vanished totally, completely. And these challenges are, women issues with women's lack of property and inheritance rights, or evils of dowry in patrilocal setups, and lack of autonomy or access to markets, lower productivity. All these expose them to poverty and make them dependent. Women's economic dependency heightens in the state of domestic violence, which is a manifestation in many senses of the intra household inequities. So, just to conclude, which is that evidently women and gender studies in India have grown into a multi-faceted area of critical study, vitalized by ongoing debates about what lies within and outside its boundaries. But boundaries and this increasing complexity has forced uh, the women and gender studies to come to terms with its own configurations and locations within the institutions, leading at times to agonizing moments of identity crisis also, because in universities across the globe, again, it's not just a phenomena in India, but in the university system across the globe, there are challenges that are posed by Black women or women of color to mainstream women's movement towards the latter part of the last century. Okay, and that has led to establishment of gender and transgender studies or cultural studies or race studies alongside women's studies. So these are the these do offer us certain challenges in which women studies specifically, they have to absorb and embrace uh, uh, multidisciplinary approach. They can't, the issues that they write about uh, cannot be limited to the academic discourse. They have to take into consideration discourses like transgender discourse or cultural studies or racial studies. So these are the issues that women and gender studies are facing at the moment, and they are negotiating very well in order to give equal research space, because these are research centers, to give equal research space to issues that specifically plague women from all the classes, castes, and women belonging to different stratas of society. So it is not just the academic discourse that they are contributing to, but they are contributing to also the socio cultural, socio economic issues that women in India are facing. That's all from my side. Though I think I finished a little early, 5 or 7 minutes early, but we can have discussion. So thank you. Thanks again for your patient hearing.
Thank you, ma'am. Audience, do you have any questions or any observations to make? You can unmute your mic and you can speak. Any questions, any queries? Okay, ma'am, I suppose your talk today was self-explanatory, and so most of them have mentioned that it was an informative session.
Yes, thank you. I can read the comments. But again, I would say that I did not keep my talk very literary, because the entire focus of my research also is that how we have to connect the academics with the real life, and specifically when it comes to women's struggles and gender issues. So it would be really nice if your college can also establish a women's center, women's study center, women development center that can take up minor projects maybe on such issues, specifically faced by women in your region or your area. That's how we have to that's the way forward for academics.
Ma'am, we do have a women's center studies center in our college, and I think they are undertaking some research projects. I do not really know the particulars of it, but we do have a center for women's studies, and it is an active center for now. They are doing a lot of like projects. They are undertaking a lot of projects now.
That's really good to hear.
Thank you, ma'am. So thank you, Professor, for that one informative and reflective session. You kind of trace back the 3 waves of feminism and their impact in India, impact in Indian women in particular. And your emphasis on intersectionality was, I think, thought-provoking, and it was the need of the hour. So were your reflections on how the gender studies centers are now concentrated in academic institutions, and the need for such work to move down to the grassroots, like to come down to the streets, so that even the underprivileged, the marginalized sections of women can also be benefited from them. And so you've given us certain areas of research where I think more work can be concentrated on. So it was all in all a very, very informative session. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, participants. Tomorrow we meet for the 5th day of the webinar series, and after which the feedback, the e-certificates will be distributed to all those who attended the 5 sessions, and if you've submitted your feedback links. So we meet again tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Thank you.